You're holding out hope.
Yeah.
This is all a big mistake. You have misspelled the last name. You're at the wrong house. You need to be next door. Any place but my place. But when they hand you your child's driver's license, you know he's gone. And he's never coming back. There's one thing I knew at that point, and that was that I didn't want to be a victim. The world needs people who take something bad and they make something good come from it. I made that connection. I'm like, I think I'm going to walk. But I sort of changed my mindset and stopped thinking about the 1,200 miles and started thinking, I'm going to walk another 3 miles. My wife, Bev, will be there. I'll take a break. I'll get up and do it again. And it's a great metaphor for life. Bad stuff happens to everybody. The way you respond to adversity is going to define your life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Broken Beautiful Me, Stories of Hope, Gratitude, and Resilience. And I am so honored today to have as my guest Barry Adkins. After losing his 18-year-old son, Kevin, to alcohol poisoning, as Barry saw it, he had two choices. He could curl up in the corner and allow himself to become a victim, or he could get out and tell as many people as possible about what happened to his son, Kevin. Barry chose the latter. In an effort to raise awareness about the dangers of binge drinking, Barry set out on an epic 1,400-mile journey on foot from Arizona to Montana with his son's ashes in his backpack, stopping at numerous schools, churches, and treatment facilities along the way to share his story. Barry's presentation describes in powerful detail the night his son died, the quiet Sunday morning he got that knock on the door, and how he came up with the idea to walk from Arizona to Montana. Barry's message is both a powerful inspiration and a warning about the consequences of even one night of binge drinking. Barry, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Kelly.
So just to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how this all started for you, what happened and what led you to, what I would call truly your mission today?
My son died of alcohol poisoning on the day he moved out on his own. That night, his friends decided to throw a housewarming party for him. Started with a keg of beer, moved on to shots. He passed out a short time after he left a voicemail for his sister. The people at the party laid him in his bed on his side in case he vomited. But his friend Craig was worried about him, kept going back in to check on him. Around 4 a.m., calls started coming into 911. The first calls were difficulty breathing. The next calls were not breathing. My son died alone in a hospital while I slept peacefully in my bed. The next morning was Sunday morning, right? And my wife and I are sitting around drinking coffee, talking about what we're going to do or not do that day. At about 8:30 in the morning, the doorbell rings. And we're looking at each other because we weren't expecting company. And I open the door and I see two police officers and someone in plain clothes at my front door. It should have been a big red flag, right? It should have been, but I'm that guy. It didn't even occur to me that something bad had happened. I actually joked with them as they came in, thinking this had to have something to do with a dog or a parked car. But they didn't laugh at any of my jokes. One of the officers and the person in plain clothes stayed by the front door. The other officer walked in and stood in front of a brown chair that Kevin had sat in 2 weeks before and talked about how his life was finally beginning. He said there'd been an accident. Your son is dead. We asked who, because we have a number of children. They said it was Kevin, and they handed me his driver's license. There is something pretty final about it when a police officer hands you your child's driver's license, because until that exact moment in time, you're holding out hope.
Yeah.
This is all a big mistake. You have misspelled the last name. You're at the wrong house. You need to be next door. Any place but my place.
Mm-hmm.
But when they hand you your child's driver's license, you know he's gone and he's never coming back.
My gosh, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry that, I know I received a phone call, not a knock on the door. And I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am that you had to experience that. That must have been absolutely devastating.
And then you got to do this thing, what are you going to do with his remains, right? Or what were you going to do? We had him cremated. And, you go down to the funeral home, you walk into the funeral home and they've got nice pictures on the wall and they're playing music in the background. Take me into an office, set me down in this big, comfortable chair, big desk in front of me. Funeral director walks in, sets an urn down in front of me, an urn that holds all the remains of the kid that I burped, changed his diapers, coached baseball, basketball, soccer, football, taught him to shoot a gun and swing a golf club. All the remains of him were sitting in an urn in front of me. There's one thing I knew at that point, and that was that I didn't want to be a victim. Because the world doesn't need any more victims. We've got plenty already.
Mm-hmm.
The world needs people who take something bad and they make something good come from it. And I thought about what I would hope somebody else would do. And for me, it was a relatively easy answer, was to get out and tell the story. Not for the money, because as you well know, there is no money in the world that'll fix the hurt.
No.
The only thing that helps is to try to make something good come from such a senseless tragedy.
Yeah. My goodness. So from that moment, you knew very early on that that's the path that you wanted to take. So how did that evolve then into your journey?
So a little bit, there is another event I didn't mention there. And that is, after Kevin died, I was angry with God. And I told him so because I did not understand why a loving God would take your child from you. Why not just take me? I was 48 years old at the time. Take me and let him live. And I was angry with him. And I told him, you back up time. Take me, let him live. I don't think that's an unusual thought for a parent to have.
No.
A couple days later, I was laying in bed, and I need a little grace here to try to tell this, but I was laying in bed. It's about 4:00 in the morning. And the only way I can describe it is I thought someone walked in the room. I had that feeling that someone had just walked in the room. There was a light I've never seen before and haven't seen since. And there was a message. And the message was that Kevin didn't suffer and something very good would come from this.
Mm.
Before I knew it, it was gone. I didn't get to ask what that meant. Nothing. And I think that's the point that's my mission.
So at that point, you knew that it was going to be your path to make something good come from this.
That's all I knew. And I didn't know what that was, Kelly. Is that a letter to the editor? Right?
So how did you
what is
come?
it? I still don't know what it is.
It still evolves.
I honestly don't. Is it a letter to the editor? Is it, doing an interview? I think that's the point, is that I just got to chase it.
So what led you then to make the decision that I'm going to carry my son in my backpack, which I think is beautiful. Because I carried my son in my backpack as well, back to Newfoundland, where he was born. And so what made you decide to make that epic journey?
It was kind of a convoluted thing. So I live in Gilbert, Arizona. That's where Kevin was. That's where he passed away. But I grew up in Kalispell, Montana. And Kevin was a little bit of a cowboy redneck. And he had been there a number of times and always talked about wanting to move there someday and buy a ranch. So that's where the idea to take his ashes there. The actual idea to walk, I don't know how old most of your audience is, but there's a movie called Lonesome Dove. It had
Hmm.
Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Duvall in it. That was
Yep.
Kevin's favorite movie. I tell everybody, watch the movie, you'll see the connection. That's where in my mind, I made that connection. I'm like, I think I'm going to walk there, which is just a crazy thought, right? But I tell everybody, if I can pull off something like that, imagine what you can do.
So, what did your family, how did they respond to that?
Good question. Um, my wife was very supportive of it, right? She was terrified, but very supportive of it. I had family members, close family members, who tried to talk me out of it. I had a lot of people try to talk to me, including my employer. And I understand why they did, why they wanted to do that, because they were afraid I was going to fail.
Hmm.
You know, I had one family member say, well, why don't you just go walk for 2 weeks this summer and then next summer come and walk another 2 weeks and do that? And I'm like, no, I'm going to leave and I'm going to walk to Montana. And I don't blame those people for trying to talk me out of it because there's a risk of failure. And believe me, I was aware of that. But
Hmm.
I had a guy, um, I just was talking about this the other day. I talked to a lot of people about taking on big things like this. You know, there's people that have walked across country for this or that rode their bike and that kind of stuff. But one guy, we were talking about it, and I'm like, I want to do it, but I don't know. And he said, well, how do you think you'd feel about it in 10 years if you don't do it?
Oh, great question.
Absolutely. And that's what sealed the deal for me because you don't know what your health is going to be like. Yeah, sure, I should probably wait and kind of organize a little more and that kind of stuff, but um, you don't know what the future holds. Only God knows that, and so
Yeah.
that's why I decided, yeah, as soon as I can do this, we're going to do it.
And do you feel, I mean, I think, well, when you lose anybody, but in particular, when you lose a child, you realize just how the fragility of life, but how fleeting it is and how things can change so quickly, so that you need to act on those little nudges, those little whispers when you get them.
You most assuredly do because you don't know what the future holds, right? That's just that's one thing you learn from these kind of things is if you think you want to do it, um, takes a little bit of guts, little bit of grace, help from above, uh, but you have to work on it. You have to act on it.
So tell me about the walk. Tell me what that
Sure.
was like for you.
I could probably talk for another 2 hours about the walk. It was um, it was really neat. There you meet a lot of wonderful people when you're out there on the road. Almost every day, somebody would stop and ask me why I'm out there. Do I need it? If it was raining, just about every car that went by, hey, you want to get in the car? No, I don't want to get in the car. But everybody's got a story,
Yes.
right? And you learn those stories. Probably the coolest thing that happened was so for those of you who aren't familiar, I left Gilbert, Arizona, which is part of Phoenix, went up through Payson, Arizona, over to Flagstaff, up to Page, Arizona, and then up through Utah and Idaho and Montana. Just outside of Flagstaff, I had a car go by and saw the brake lights come on. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to take a break and talk to this guy. And he got out and he said, are you the guy that spoke at Flagstaff High School a couple of days ago? I'm like, yeah, I did. And he said, I just want to thank you because for the first time, my son came home and told me about school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I I'm at a loss for words here because it's the fact that you followed the nudges, you talked, and then to kind of close that loop by meeting that boy's parent and see that the impact of Kevin's story was something that was, and for a teenager to come home and talk about school, we as parents, we all know that
Yes.
that's not a common thing. Um, so you could see the power of you sharing Kevin's story.
Those are the coolest stories. There's a few others that are very similar to that, where it's a parent reaching out saying, hey, my kid came home and told me about this.
Yeah.
And that makes it a little easier the rest of the day, right? Because you're walking and you're going, okay, we're good. The blisters don't feel as bad. The plantar fasciitis doesn't feel as bad, all of that kind of stuff. Because I did. I had, that's one of the questions about the walk. Did I have any health problems? I had plantar fasciitis, if you know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Foot pain. I had blisters. I had a sore knee. I had an ingrown toenail I had to have operated on when I got back. But all of those things, with time, I learned how to manage them, right? One requirement I had for hotels, which I did not sleep under bridges, I stayed in hotels, was I needed to have a bathtub so I could soak in it, because I averaged probably, I think it was either 13 or 14 miles a day.
Okay.
And which doesn't sound too bad until you do it a bunch of days in a row. And then all these
Right.
things start catching up with you. I have people have asked me, did I ever think about quitting? The answer to that is no. But I wasn't even the Flagstaff, and I was starting to wonder if I was going to make it.
Yeah.
Right? Because all these things are hurting. It's cold, it's raining, it's snowing, it's doing all these winds blowing, which was my thing that drove me the most crazy. But I think it was a problem with my mindset, because I was thinking that I had 1,200 more miles to go, and that was inside my head.
Mm-hmm.
But I sort of changed my mindset and stopped thinking about the 1,200 miles and started thinking, I'm going to walk another 3 miles. My wife, Bev, will be there. I'll take a break. I'll get up and do it again. And it's a great metaphor for life, right? Because if you let that get inside your head, you're probably not going to make it to Montana.
No.
But I didn't focus on Montana. I focused on, let me take a few more steps and see where we go.
Now, don't you, I mean, I see the parallels with, you're talking about the pain, the physical pains that you endured during the walk. And there's so many parallels that I see as you're talking about it to the grief itself. But the grief is an emotional and internal pain that you feel, and you do have to make that same decision every day you wake up to just keep going when it would be much easier to stop.
Here's my perspective on grief. And this is 20 years in the rearview mirror for me. So and everyone grieves differently, 100% true. But for me, my problem was that I wanted to feel the way I did before he died.
Mm.
And that is simply physically not possible. And it took me a long time to wrap my head around that. The old Barry died on July 10th of 2005. He's as gone as his son is. There's a new Barry there. The new Barry might be a better Barry, or in a lot of cases, it goes the other way. That's your call. But the old person died with your child. That's my perspective on it 20 years in the rearview mirror.
So what do you think of the new Barry?
I'm stunned. If you would have told me, if God would have tapped me on the shoulder, before July 10th of 2005 and said, hey, I got this plan for you. you're going to do this and this and this, and you're going to get up and do a whole bunch of public speaking and get up in front of 1,000 kids and talk. I always said, yeah, you might want to pick another person. But I'm much closer to God now than I've ever been
Mm-hmm.
because I know he's there. I always, I have faith. There's no doubt about that. But when something like what happened to me happened, um, it changes you.
It
It
does.
just does. It can't help but change you. And I just, like I said, this is not something I ever planned on doing. I'm a go work in the garage on the weekends guy and not go anywhere. I'm not really, I say I'm antisocial, but I don't really go out of my way to go to any public place. I don't like going to restaurants. I don't like doing any of that stuff. Drives my kids crazy now. Let's go out and eat. Nah, why don't you get it and bring it over to my house? But
um, but there
you
is
do it.
something, do you feel, and I'm very curious about this as a fellow bereaved parent. Um, and I wrote about this after Stephen died. I felt in certain social situations, I called it the rub, that it felt like sandpaper on my skin. So some of the trivial things that before Stephen died, I probably would be caught up in, like, oh, how much ice time your kid got at hockey, or,
Right.
something trivial, that all of that just falls away. And so solitude is actually, it's very comfortable. Because I never wanted to step back into that part of life again. I because I didn't feel like I could keep Stephen close to me in my heart when I got caught up in the minutia. So
Yeah.
I'm very much like you. I'm not out to restaurants all the time, and there's just something about living a quiet life. I mean, I'm very attached to nature.
Yeah.
I think nature is kind of God's messenger in many ways. Um, but I think there's a wisdom that you receive, and you don't want to lose it.
Yeah. There is. So I grew up in Montana, and I had been up there a few times since I moved to Arizona. And we would go into the Bob Marshall Wilderness. People can look it up and see where it is. And I was in there with my uncle one time, and it's quiet, it's peaceful, it's absolutely spectacular. We had hiked up on, I wouldn't call it a mountain, but we were up on a hill, definitely. And we were sitting there and it was just quiet. And I turned to him and I whispered, "It's so quiet up here." And he turned to me and said, "Yep. And it's got a lot to say."
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's where
Yeah.
that quiet time comes in.
Yeah. Um, as you were walking, did you feel like it was you and Kevin taking that walk together?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Because there were, I always, the way I looked at it was whenever I needed help, something would happen, right? That would
Yeah.
help me out. Because it's physically challenging, right? Dealing with, we left in February of 2007 because I wanted to speak at schools, right? So I can't do it in the summer. So most people think of Arizona as a desert, but northern Arizona is anything but a desert. That was actually the hardest part of the journey, was getting out of Arizona, because Phoenix, Gilbert is like 1,300 feet elevation. Flagstaff is 7,400 feet.
Oh my gosh, I did not realize that.
And there's a lot of hills. There's a lot of ups and downs between here and there. So,
Whew.
but I always felt like when I needed a little push, he was there.
Yeah,
100%.
cheering you on for sure.
Yeah.
So, um, when you reached your destination, tell me about that moment.
It's a relief, right? But you've just finished this giant project, right? And it's time to leave his ashes up there, which we did. It's a physical relief, but then you're kind of wondering what's next. In the book, I ended up writing a book about it. And when I'm self-published, and, I would give copies of it to my family and they would read it and go, yeah, it's great. And I'm like, I know, I want to hear what you didn't like. So I gave it to a book club, and they told me, oh, we like this, 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 and this. And then I said, okay, I want every one of you to tell me something you didn't like about it. And one of them said, you told me more about your shoe selection than you did about how you felt when you finished the walk. That's a guy thing. But it was a great point, right? It was just like, oh, I'm done. Now what's next? And I never planned on writing the book, Kelly. I kept a blog. This predates all the cool stuff you'd be able to do today, right? This was 2007. I kept a blog, and I called a buddy of mine up and I said, well, I'm going to print out copies of the blog. Do you want a copy of it? I'll put it in a 3-ring binder and send it to you. And he said, no. I said, why not? He said, because you have to write a book. And I said, no, I'm not. A couple of years later, because it's a big project, right? It's not like just one speaking engagement here or there. This is a project. Writing a book is work. It took me a year or two. And I actually read, the best advice I got was from Stephen King. He wrote a book on writing. I read I'm sure you probably read a lot of different books before you write a book, right? To get an idea what you really want to say. But Stephen King pointed out that it's 2 parts of your brain to write a book. There's a creative part, and then there's a logical part. And he said the creative part, he said he would go in, and he said he used a typewriter. I used a computer, but he said he'd go in there, he would close the door, and it was just a stream of consciousness. Mm-hmm. Whatever you're thinking about at that time, write it down. Doesn't matter. Don't think about where it's going to go or if you're ever going to use it. Just let it go. Then later, with the logical part of your brain, you go back and clean it up. Would I redo the book if I had time? Yeah. When you read your own stuff, you're like, I could probably do better than that today, but I don't have the bandwidth to do it.
Well, but I mean, I think capturing it when you're in that moment, when it's still fresh in your mind, we talk about that wisdom that comes with the experience of loss and suffering. I often said, because Stephen passed on the 4th of July, and I often said that I felt like God shot a flare up into the night sky of my life, and everything that mattered was illuminated. And I needed to start writing as quickly as I could so that I didn't forget any of it, because that was what I needed to know about my life. But when I look back years later, I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, part of me, honestly, I think you really didn't care about what anybody thought. You just put it all out there. And now I think I would filter myself years later. Do you find
the lens of time changes things, right?
It does.
It does. Would I have written it exactly the same way? No, because as you can imagine, the way I tell the story has evolved a lot through the years. When I was on the walk, I had it all typed out and I read it. Yeah. And you could hear a pin drop in the room when there's 1,000 kids in the room. And I say, that's a God thing. That's not me, because I'm reading this thing. And I rationalized it with, Martin Luther King, his I Have a Dream speech, he read. But after doing it enough times, I just, stopped doing that. And I got some great advice about that. This young lady from notmykid.org here in town, she kind of coached me on it, and I'll never forget what she said. I gave her the speech, right? I had it written out, but I read it to her. And one of the things she said was, you need to really focus on details. And she said, I want to be sitting in the room with you when you get that knock on the door.
Mm.
I want to be walking into the funeral home with you when you walk in that funeral home. Those are the things I want to know.
Yeah.
As an audience, they want that detail. They want to be able to create that picture. And I use that. I'm a happily married man. So my wife, Bev, would tell me, she would sit in the back in a lot of them. And then she would tell me, you kind of lost them with that, especially when I stopped using the paper, right? I was kind of trying to create it. And she would say, you lost them with that part. You need to either change it or drop it, because you
Right.
can read an audience from the back.
Oh, you can. I'm very thankful for my husband for that same reason. It's a good feedback mechanism, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The the funny part, another humorous thing. So the brown chair. So I included that. I started including that. I talked about how Kevin sat in this brown chair and talked about how his life was finally beginning. And then a little later, I talked about how the police officer stood in front of that brown chair. So I did that one day. And there was probably, I don't know, in that particular one, there's probably 300 or 400 kids in the room. And I walked over and sat down next to Bev and I said, well, what did you think about the brown chair? And she goes, it's gold, not brown. So it's important to have a sense of humor about all these things.
It is so. It is so. Hey guys, Kelly here. I wanted to jump in and let you know that you can find out more about my work by visiting my website at kellybuckley.com, or you can find my books on Amazon. Okay, back to the episode. So tell me now about, since this walk, and you did some talks as you were on that journey, but now you've continued to speak to kids in schools and tell Kevin's story, and tell me how that has evolved and what your goals are with continuing to do that very important work.
The key thing is I'm willing to go anywhere and tell the story. Um, Obviously, you can get a hold of me on Facebook. It's Kevin's Last Walk, and then kevinslastwalk.com. But I'm willing to go anywhere and tell the story. If I have to get on an airplane, there's travel costs, but that's all I ever do. And I've been to several different states and told the story. I've probably told the story just this spring 20 times. I went to Wisconsin, spoke at a school there. I spoke at a leadership conference. I did a podcast in person there, which is a very different thing, by the way, Kelly, when you're sitting in a room right across from the person. That was really interesting. But I just want to go tell the story. That's my big thing. And I'm not looking to make any money on it. You get to the point, that's another thing losing a child teaches you, is that money isn't really all that important.
No.
It's about, and there was the same thing on the walk. There was a lot of times where people would reach out about an additional school. People would stop along the way and say, hey, can you come to my school? I'm like, yeah, we'll just do it. And I'm the same way. In Arizona, I travel around the state telling the story, but because I just drive, I don't charge anything for that. I just want to tell the story.
Yeah. What do your kids think about this beautiful mission that you've taken on and how you are honoring their brother?
They're very aware of it, but I like to say, and I think this was written in the Bible, you're never famous in your own backyard, right? They know about it, but they don't usually quiz me very much about it. I think almost all of them, there's actually, I think a few of them that have not ever come and heard the story. I have a lot of friends who, and relatives are like, no, I don't think I could sit through it.
Yeah.
And they say, I'm too close to it. I just don't think I can sit through it. but they're very aware of it. The grandkids are aware of it. One of the high schools I've had, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the grandkids introduced me there.
Wow.
So there's 3 takeaways. One is about decision making, the other one's about adversity, and the third one's about forgiveness. We can talk about those in a minute. But the adversity one, what I tell everybody is the way you respond to adversity is going to define your life. One of my grandsons now has that tattooed on his arm.
Oh, that's
In my
beautiful.
handwriting, which was
Oh,
another funny story. He wanted it written in my handwriting. He wanted to do it in my handwriting. And Bev, she'd say, "Could you write out those 3 things for me?" And I'm like, "No, I'll type them for you." And she kept saying, "Would you write them out? Would you write them out?" I'm like, "No." And she would actually set a piece of paper and a pencil by my plate at dinner and say, "Would you write those out now?" I'm like, "No." And my grandson wanted to get this tattoo. So he's after her. He wanted to surprise me with it. So he's after her. So he's texting her, "Have you got him to do it?" And she's like, "Have you met your grandfather?" So he surprised me with it. But yeah, it's pretty cool. It was in my handwriting.
that is beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, tell me about um, tell me about the 3 takeaways. Let's talk about that first.
So 3 things. The first one's about decision making. The 2 most important decisions you're ever going to make, apart from following Jesus Christ, are about drugs and alcohol. It isn't even close, guys. We all know stories. You need to educate yourselves about the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse as if your life depends upon it, because it does. It just
Yeah.
does. And the second thing is about adversity. Bad stuff happens to everybody. The way you respond to adversity is going to define your life. Pain is fertile ground for radical change.
Mm.
Don't waste the pain. Don't waste the pain. And third, and probably most important, is about forgiveness. It was easy for me to forgive the guys at the party because this was Kevin's choice, right? This was his decision. It was easy for me to forgive my kid, but that's what parents do. But there's one person who was really hard to forgive, and that was me. It took 1,400 miles and 5 pairs of shoes, but I have found a way to forgive myself. I heard a pastor describe it best once. He said that anger and vengeance lead to one thing: destruction.
Mm.
Forgiveness leads to healing. And sometimes the most important person you need to forgive is yourself. We all
Mm.
make mistakes. It's the
And
way
a-
you handle it.
and as a parent, you review over everything in your head about every moment leading up to, and
You
could I
do.
have done anything differently that would have prevented this from happening?
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, my husband and I work on that too. We're still a work in progress on that.
And that was the other part of it. I refuse to play the blame game.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is there part about yourself? Yes, but I'm not going to get into blaming. There was a 28-year-old at the party, right, who was the instigator of all of this. Yeah, that's on him. I'm not. There's plenty of blame to go around. Should I have talked to him more about that stuff? Yes, I should have. But as a parent, I'm just not going to play the blame game because it's not going to lead anywhere good.
No, no, certainly not. Um, so back to you talking to the kids at school. I'm very curious about, um, maybe some of the most memorable conversations that you had with kids after you gave this talk to a large audience. If you had connections with individual kids from the school who came up to you and talked to you about how they felt about it, or shared how it resonated with them.
Kids do come up and share the stories of losses that they've had. It was interesting. I had one kid who came up and said, "Do you believe in God?" I'm like, "Yeah." Because, well, my mom believes in it, him too, and I just don't know. I'm like, "You should listen to your mom." But the thing that a couple of the schools have started doing this, they actually have them write me thank you notes, which you would think it's a teenager. Um, it's probably just gonna be, "Hey, thanks for coming in. It was cool." I actually summarized because I had at a school where I probably did 300 students, and the feedback they gave stunned me
Wow.
because there's kids that have heard it 2 or 3 times and they're like, "I get something new out of this every time I hear it." And one of them actually said, because at schools I don't get to talk about God, but there's one where the girl said, "There is no way God wasn't involved in this," right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's I'll have to send it. I summarized it to a page or two of just the highlights, but it was it's stunning how well they do listen when you tell them a story.
And I mean, and I sometimes I think about kids now who are in high school, and I think about when how very simplistic our lives were. Generations ago we didn't have the same worries or stressors, or the availability of things that could really hurt us. I mean,
Yeah.
I grew up in a very small town, and I'm so thankful for that when I look back at how simplistic my youth was, in
Yeah.
comparison to what kids face today. Um, so to have someone to come into the school like yourself and to speak so openly about it, because there's just so much noise that they have around them all day. As soon as they pick up their phone, they have how many voices are coming at them just from their phone.
Yes.
And so to hear one voice speaking about one story and the consequences and the things that they can take from that, it must be truly impactful for them, because it's hard to get people to sit down and pay attention these days.
It is. And again, I think it's either a God thing or the grandfather effect. Because and again, when I say I'm just here to tell you a story, you can just kind of feel that things in the room change.
Yeah.
And the other thing I have them do is I tell everybody to look at me for just 1 second. And I tell them, "I don't want you to listen here. I want you to listen here. This is where
Mhm.
the story comes from. This is where life change happens." And again, this has evolved, and it's the good Lord and my wife helping me with those things. But those are all things that I learned through the years, um, that seem to work.
So what would you say? And I know we both have crossed paths with many other bereaved parents. What would you say to a bereaved parent who is really struggling right now to find meaning or to find a path forward?
I would say that the first thing you have to do is find a way to forgive yourself, because that's usually, from my perspective, I mean, everybody sees it a little differently, but it's forgiving yourself for what happened and then trying to make something good come from what happened to your child. What that is, that's between you and God, right? That might be a foundation. It might be something tiny. It doesn't have to be a walk to Montana. Um, There are numerous nonprofits out there that you can work with or do your own thing. Um, but get someplace quiet and see where it leads you. But it starts with that forgiveness thing, I think, Kelly. I mean,
Mhm.
that's certainly part of it, right? As a parent, it's hard to forgive yourself.
Yeah, and we put so much weight into we've created this beautiful human being and all those hopes and dreams that we have, and um, when that changes, uh, finding a way forward is when everything I think you've kind of envisioned in your mind has changed. Finding a way forward can be very difficult. Um, but when I hear your story, um, it just feels to me, and this is just my opinion, that Kevin is still very much with you and all around you every time you speak to another person, and hopefully give them that little grain of wisdom that they will think about when they are out and about, as young kids will be.
Yeah.
Um, when you touch their heart, that's Kevin continuing to live on.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one other story you touched on it. I probably better tell you this one too. So there was I spoke at a school up in North Scottsdale, and a couple weeks later, I got an email I'll never forget. Um, there had been a party. One of the students at the party had passed out. One of the students that had heard our story wanted to call 911. The other students there did not want him to call 911 because they didn't want to get in trouble. That student put the student that was passed out in his car, drove him to an urgent care facility, who called 911. They air-evac'd him out and saved his life.
Oh my gosh.
So they do listen.
That's yeah. And I mean
They
that
do listen.
saved that person's life.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um so what would you like to leave the audience with? So the people who kind of tune into this podcast, some are bereaved parents like we are. Some are people who have gone through different types of loss, but everybody kind of arrives here with a struggle. That's kind of, and that's why I wanted to do this podcast. I wanted to tell people stories because just like you going to the school, this is my way of kind of sharing other people's wisdom from their journey in the hope that we can give people something to anchor themselves to in hope and faith. So, what would you like to leave our audience with in terms of wisdom for their path forward?
It comes back to something very good. Um, and everyone can, I'll use the term contribute, but I'm not looking for money, but everyone can contribute to making something very good come by making those connections. I've actually done podcasts that resulted in me going to other states to tell the story because someone made a connection for me, because it's the connections and the people behind the scenes that make all this stuff happen, principals and teachers and parents and that kind of stuff that um, contribute to that with their time and their effort. Um, there's no substitute for that. There just
Mm.
isn't. Knowing that you're part of something like this. I'm a one-man band, and people who want to help, I'm sure there's something.
And I mean, it's such a, if for those people, like for teachers, for example, to know that they have access to someone like you who can, um, have a forum where students may listen to you where they probably would kind of tune it out if it was just a teacher. I think that that's very powerful. So if people want to get in touch with you about coming to visit their school or to visit, a youth group at a church or
Yeah.
whomever, how do they reach you?
Two best ways: on Facebook, it's Kevin's Last Walk. And then the website is kevinslastwalk.com. There's a contact button there.
Okay.
Either one of those ways are, and you can find me. I've done a few of these podcasts. So yeah, it's just Kevin's Last Walk, all one word.
Perfect. Barry, I can't thank you enough for being so generous with your time and sharing Kevin with us today. It's been such a pleasure and an honor, and thank you for the service that you are doing in his honor. It's so important for our young people to hear this message.
I think it's the least I can do. But thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you. And we will see you again next time, guys. Thank you for joining me today on Broken Beautiful Me. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and insightful. Remember, every scar tells a story, and every story has the power to heal. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Your support means the world to me, and it helps spread the message of hope and resilience to more people like us. Don't forget to leave a review and share this podcast with your friends and family. Together, we can create a community of strength and beauty in our brokenness. Until next time, stay strong, stay beautiful, and keep shining.